Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel, here with Tim Duffy, the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Association of School Committees, talking about Governor Raimondo's budget proposal this week, which you said was essentially level funding education.
It's pretty much level funding education. There's a modest $6 million increase, but that will be offset by pension costs that the districts have to meet. So.
And when you heard Tuesday evening in her State of the State address, her promise, her proposal to fund school infrastructure repairs to the tune of $1 billion over 5 years, what was your response when you heard that?
Well, we were encouraged by that. In actuality, some of the funds of about $350 million are already obligated funds for prior construction projects. So this is a reimbursement on debt and principal that school districts have already incurred. So that's not available for new construction. But it still leaves a substantial amount, $650 million for infrastructure repair if the legislature moves forward and puts the $250 million general obligation bond on the ballot in November.
And I know this has been discussed before, but talk with us about the identification of the neediest schools. There's a lot of needy schools around the state. Right. How are they in the pipeline? Is there a pecking order as we speak for people who are lined up for their schools?
Well, the way it sort of works is right now there's the governor has included $10 million in the school construction fund, that school building fund. And that comes about annually, and that's entirely on a first-come, first-served basis. The $250 million statewide bond issue will be administered in the same fashion, and it'll allow the state to leverage its greater borrowing power to get better interest rates on the bonds. In other instances, school districts will go out with their own general obligation bonds. So if a community like Smithfield, where I live, elects to go out with a $50 or $60 million general obligation bond, it'll be for their schools. Mm-hmm. So it will only be $250 million on the statewide bond that would go to the neediest and more critically needy schools.
Okay, so we're looking at FY19 as the governor is trying to close deficit in FY18. But again, looking at this overall picture for FY19, do you have concerns? I mean, you see it in this budget here for the state of the schools when we're facing such dire fiscal challenges.
Yeah, I really do think that that it's going to be a really tough road the next couple of years, especially if there's a reduction in federal funding. We get roughly about $230 to $240 million in federal aid, and we really don't know there's going to be a shutdown. Hopefully there's not going to be a shutdown tonight by the federal government, but I mean there are also discussions about curtailing all sorts of aid programs, Title I, that schools depend on, and the needier the schools get a lot of that revenue. So that's in play as well. So there's a lot of concerns out there about the lack of federal funding or the stability of federal funding and the over-reliance on property taxes.
Well, I wanted you to come in to give viewers a better sense following the budget proposal by the governor as to what we're looking at moving forward now through the General Assembly process. But anything else that I didn't touch upon that you think folks should know, what you're facing both from a budgetary and legislative standpoint?
Well, I think one of the things that distinguishes us from Massachusetts is the fact that Massachusetts went through a process where the courts determined that the way they fund education violated the Constitution of that state. And I think it's imperative that we put before the voters an amendment to our state constitution guaranteeing every Rhode Islander has the right to an education. It is not a civil right in the state of Rhode Island. Our courts have ruled twice now that education is not a constitutionally protected right, and it should be.
So moving forward, let's talk about how that approach is made. Would that have been in that proposed constitutional convention? How do we approach it? How would it be approached from a legislative standpoint? That to be proposed and put on the ballot?
Right. The legislature can, on any general election date, put before the voters articles to amend the constitutions of the state. There have been proposals in the past, for instance, to link the governor and lieutenant governor on one ticket rather than having them run independently. The governor is pushing for a line-item veto. She wants to amend the Constitution to allow for that. So, I mean, if the legislature sees fit to put this before the voters, then I think it'll be most important issue to confront the voters in the 2018 election.
Do you think that there's a possibility? Are there any legislative champions that you've talked with that would put this forth?
Yeah, we've talked to a number of legislators. The minority caucuses in both the House and Senate are very actively engaged on putting this forward. We're going to probably do a symposium to educate people as to what the implications are for not having a constitutional right to an education. It violates the Equal Protection Clause otherwise. And we think it's the foundation for prosperity in the state.
Well, plenty to keep an eye on in the education arena after we've heard from the state from the governor, her budget proposal, and the state of education from Tim Duffy with the Rhode Island Association of School Committees. So Tim, I appreciate your taking the time to come in.
Kate, my pleasure.
I'm sure we'll talk at the State House soon.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll let you go around the corner.
All right.
Okay. Tim Duffy with the Rhode Island Association of School Committees in to talk about his reaction to the governor's FY19 budget proposal. Talked about it being essentially level funded. Talked about some additional funds made available but offset by pension obligations. That just about wraps up another week here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We appreciate your tuning in. We'll see you next week on Monday here at GoLocal. I'm GoLocal News Editor